All right, everyone, welcome. Today, we're going to dive into a debate that sits right at the very heart of our field, English for academic purposes. We're going to explore a problem that, for a long time, has left a lot of instructors feeling stuck. And then we'll look at a really exciting new approach, an interdisciplinary one, that might just be the way forward. So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll set the stage with the big scholarly debate, this clash between two camps, specific and general academic English. Then, we'll really dig into why that general approach kind of hit a dead end. After that, we'll explore this new interdisciplinary model that offers a way out, and we'll wrap it all up with some key takeaways. Okay, let's jump right in. At the core of what we do, there's this deep, fundamental tension. It's a debate that's been going on for decades, really, about what is the absolute best way to get our students ready for the incredibly tough demands of university study. And, the brilliant Ken Highland just absolutely nails it here. This whole question of specificity isn't just some technical detail about how to design a course. No, it's bigger than that. It forces every single one of us to decide where we stand, to take a philosophical position on what language is and how people learn it. That choice defines everything we do. So this fundamental choice, this philosophical stance, has basically split the field into two very distinct and often competing philosophies that have really dominated the conversation for years. Let's break them down. So on one side, you have ESAP. That's English for specific academic purposes. Think of this as the specialist. It's laser-focused, tailored to the unique language of a single field, like engineering or history. And on the other side, you've got EGAP, English for general academic purposes. This is the broader approach, teaching a common core of skills that are supposed to be useful for everybody, no matter what they're studying. Now, the case for ESAP is incredibly strong. It argues that every single discipline is its own little world, with its own language, its own rules of argument. From this point of view, teaching some generic academic English is like trying to teach sports without picking a specific game like soccer or tennis. The ESAP approach is directly relevant to what students need, and that gives them a huge motivational boost. They can see the point immediately. But then you look at the case for EGAP, and, by contrast, it often sounds like it's on the back foot, almost defensive. So many of its justifications are about practical problems, not pedagogical strengths. Things like, we have mixed classes, or our teachers aren't experts in biochemistry. The arguments are often rooted in limitations, which isn't a great place to be. And this is where we hit a wall. This defensive posture leads to a real problem, especially for the EGAP. The whole debate has reached this frustrating impasse, a state of being stuck that the source material for today calls Aporetic EGAP. So let's just pause and make sure we all get this key term, aporia. It's a fantastic word from ancient Greek, and it describes this feeling of being utterly puzzled, of hitting an intellectual dead end where you just can't proceed. And for a very long time, that's exactly what EGAP has felt like. Stuck. Okay, let's make this more concrete with a little analogy. Think about a fitness debate. ESAP is like training to be a competitive powerlifter. Everything you do is specifically designed for that one single goal. Traditional EGAP, on the other hand, is like recommending a nice daily walk. Now, is walking good for you? Of course, it's great. But is it going to prepare you to lift 500 pounds? Absolutely not. And that's the aporia. The general approach just feels insufficient for the specific high-stakes goal. And Highland, once again, just captures this feeling perfectly. EGAP is always seen as second best. It's just a bridge, something to get you started before the real learning begins in your specific discipline. It's basically treated as a temporary fix, which, let's be honest, is a pretty uninspiring position for any field to be in. So, if we're stuck in this aporia, this intellectual dead end, how on earth do we get out? Well, the breakthrough comes when we stop thinking of EGAP as general and start thinking of it as something much more powerful, interdisciplinary. And there's this brilliant practical model from the University of Leeds that shows us exactly how this works. You take a class of students from all different majors, and you give them all one broad theme to tackle, something like risk. So the engineer studies structural risk in bridges, while the business student looks at financial risk in the market. Each one writes a specific disciplinary paper, presents it to their peers, and then they all discuss what they learned from hearing these completely different perspectives. And what happens when you do this? The results are, well, they're pretty amazing and maybe not what you'd expect. Instead of making students more general, this approach actually strengthens their connection to their own discipline. Why? Because by seeing how their field is different from others, they get a much clearer sense of what makes it unique. Plus, they learn a skill that is absolutely crucial in the real world: how to explain their complex ideas to people who are not specialists. Okay, so this is about more than just a clever teaching model. Let's pull the camera back for a second and look at the bigger picture here. Reframing our work as interdisciplinary doesn't just solve a practical teaching problem. It actually forces us to think differently about what disciplines even are. The paper we're discussing today makes this really sharp and useful distinction. On one hand, you have what's called hyper-interdisciplinarity. This is the flashy, often political idea that disciplines are just arbitrary, elitist boxes we need to tear down. But then there's routine interdisciplinarity, which is just the mundane, simple fact that disciplines have always borrowed from each other, grown together, and existed in conversation. It's not revolutionary. It's just how knowledge has always worked. And what makes this even trickier is that a discipline isn't just one single thing. As the sociologist Rob Moore points out, we can understand a discipline in at least three ways: by what it studies and how, by where it lives in the university structure, and by its professional networks, the conferences and journals. This complexity shows us that the simple SAP versus EGAP fight was way too simplistic from the start. And that brings us to the most crucial point of this entire discussion. For so long, we focused on preparing students to live inside one discipline. But the reality is that their actual academic lives are spent navigating the spaces among different disciplines, constantly crossing borders. Our teaching has to reflect that messy, boundary-crossing reality. So I want to leave you with this question to think about. If we make this shift, if we stop calling our courses general and start calling them interdisciplinary, how does that change our job? How does that change what we do as EAP practitioners? Does it mean we're no longer just trying to help students fit into one box, but instead we're teaching them how to become translators, communicators, and bridge builders between entire worlds of knowledge? Let's talk about it.